All right, everyone, Jack Donovan began, leaning against the kitchen counter, his fingers drumming lightly on the polished surface. Megan looked up from her book, her eyes momentarily distracted by the calm, confident look on her husband's face. Max, always full of energy, was bouncing around the room, while Lily sat at the table coloring in a princess-themed workbook. "I've got a surprise for you all," Jack continued, a mischievous glint in his eye. Megan raised an eyebrow. She knew that look, the one that meant this was going to be something big. A vacation, she guessed, her voice tinged with playful suspicion. "Better," Jack grinned. "We're going on a cruise. A luxurious one. The best one." Megan paused, her lips parting slightly as she absorbed the news. "A cruise?" she repeated, her surprise evident. She exchanged a look with the kids, who were now fully tuned in, excitement building. "Yes, a cruise through the Caribbean. I've already made the arrangements. We leave next week." Max, his eyes wide with excitement, immediately ran over to his father. "When do we get to go swimming on a real ship?" he asked, nearly bouncing off the walls with enthusiasm. "We'll be swimming every day, buddy," Jack laughed, ruffling his son's hair. "There are pools, a kids' center, all kinds of activities. And I've even arranged a special nanny to watch over you two, while me and Mom can enjoy some time to ourselves." Megan looked thoughtful for a moment, then nodded. "Well, it sounds like it could be just what we need. A little relaxation for all of us." Jack smiled, glad to see his wife on board. "Exactly. You'll get some time to relax and unwind, and I'll have a bit of space to catch up on work." He paused, a slight, knowing smile tugging at his lips. This is going to be perfect. Little did Megan know, this trip would soon be far more than just a family vacation. The first few days aboard the cruise ship were everything Jack had hoped for. The ship was like a floating paradise, offering every luxury imaginable. Megan, after the initial excitement, seemed content lounging by the pool, while Max and Lily were happily occupied in the ship's kids' center, engaging in arts and crafts and games. Jack, however, wasn't there just to unwind. Even in this idyllic setting, he couldn't completely detach from the demands of his business. He brought along his laptop, his phone, and a few important files. But it wasn't long before he ran into someone he hadn't expected, Harry Lanza. "Jack Donovan, as I live and breathe." Harry's voice boomed across the deck. Jack turned to see a man approaching, extending his hand with a wide grin. He was taller than Jack, with salt and pepper hair and a confident, almost magnetic presence. "Harry Lanza," Jack said, shaking his hand, his surprise genuine. "What are the odds of running into you here?" Harry chuckled. "Well, I could ask you the same. But hey, the world's a small place, right?" They spent a few minutes exchanging pleasantries, catching up on the years that had passed since they last saw each other at a business conference. Harry was the owner of a large international construction company, and Jack had always admired his sharp mind and ability to spot lucrative business opportunities. As they talked, the conversation naturally shifted to work. Harry mentioned some new developments in his company, and Jack was intrigued. The two quickly found they had numerous common interests, particularly in the field of real estate development, where Jack had been looking for a new avenue to expand his own business. Harry spoke passionately about upcoming projects, and Jack, always the businessman, found himself taking mental notes. "This cruise may not just be a vacation for me after all," Jack thought, his mind racing as Harry laid out the possibilities for collaboration. "I think we could really do something big together, Jack," Harry said, his voice low but eager. "We both know the right people, we're both in the right place. I've been looking for a partner to take things to the next level, and I think you and I could make some serious waves in this industry." Jack smiled, impressed by Harry's enthusiasm. They spent the next several days together, exploring the ship's amenities and hashing out ideas. Over dinners and long walks on the deck under the stars, they discussed potential projects and business models that could reshape both their futures. As the trip wore on, the partnership began to feel more like a certainty. By the end of the cruise, Jack and Harry had not only made plans for future collaborations, but had also formed a bond that transcended business. It was clear that their meeting aboard this luxurious ship was more than just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something important. Jack was thrilled about the opportunities ahead, but little did he know, This trip would soon become more complicated than he could have ever imagined. The evening breeze was cool against Jack's face as he made his way toward the upper deck of the ship. The lights of the cruise liner glittered in the night, casting a warm, inviting glow across the water. Tonight was the ship's big gala, a lavish event with dinner, dancing, and entertainment. Jack had spent the day in meetings with Harry, but now it was time to unwind. Megan, dressed in a stunning red dress, was already waiting near the bar when Jack arrived. She looked radiant, her smile brighter than the stars above. "You look amazing," Jack said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She grinned, taking his hand. "Thanks, honey," Megan said, her voice playful. "I figured I should dress up for you tonight. You've been working so hard on this trip, and it's about time we had some fun." Jack nodded. "Agreed. Let's make the most of it." They settled into a cozy spot at the bar, their conversation light and full of laughter. The music swelled, and the ship's guests began to mingle and dance. But as the night wore on, Megan started to drink more than she usually did. At first, it was just a couple of glasses of wine, but then she moved on to cocktails, laughing more loudly with each passing drink. Jack noticed, but he was distracted, talking to a few business associates he had bumped into at the bar. He wasn't overly concerned. After all, it was supposed to be a vacation. But as the hours passed, Megan seemed to get more and more caught up in the party atmosphere. At one point, Jack noticed her deep in conversation with Tom, a young bartender with striking blue eyes and a quick smile. She was laughing too loudly at his jokes, her hand resting on his arm in a way that seemed more intimate than necessary. Jack didn't think much of it at first, but then his attention was drawn away when Harry waved him over to discuss something important. By the time the party began to wind down, Jack had lost track of Megan. He looked around, but she wasn't at the bar or anywhere near the dance floor. He asked a couple of people, but no one seemed to know where she had gone. He briefly thought of checking their cabin, but shrugged it off, assuming she was just enjoying herself. Later that night, as the ship hummed softly under the stars, Jack retired to their cabin. He changed into his pajamas, tired but content. But as he sat on the edge of the bed, the door creaked open. Megan stumbled in, her makeup smudged, her hair messier than usual. "Hey," she said, her voice slurred but with an edge of playfulness. "You wouldn't believe the night I had." Jack looked up, concern flashing through him. "Where were you? I've been looking for you." Megan laughed, tossing her purse onto the bed. "Oh, I was just having some fun, talking to people, enjoying myself." She paused, sitting down next to him. "It's nice to get away from everything for a while." Jack tried to hide his unease. "I get it. Just don't go overboard, all right?" Megan flashed him a wide grin, leaning in for a kiss. "I'm fine, Jack. Don't worry so much." But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a distant look in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Something was different. As she slipped into bed beside him, Jack lay awake, unable to ignore the nagging sense that things were beginning to shift, and not in the direction he had hoped. The next morning, Jack woke up early, a strange weight on his chest. He glanced over at Megan, still fast asleep, her breathing shallow. He got up quietly, careful not to wake her, and stepped out onto the balcony. The view of the Caribbean was breathtaking, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that the ship was no longer the relaxing escape it had been just days before. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was an email about a potential business deal, another reminder of the work that still lay ahead. But his mind kept returning to Megan. He thought about the way she had looked last night, the way she had acted with Tom, and a sinking feeling began to settle in his stomach. Things were changing, and Jack had a horrible sense that this trip, which had started as an escape, was going to lead him down a path he wasn't prepared for. Despite his growing concerns about Megan's behavior, Jack tried his best to focus on the things that truly mattered, his children. Max and Lily were both full of energy and curiosity, and Jack made it a point to spend time with them every day. He took them to the ship's kids' center, which was a paradise for children, with arts and crafts, games, and a variety of activities. He enjoyed watching their faces light up as they tried new things and made new friends. Max, especially, seemed to thrive in the environment. The 10-year-old had recently developed an interest in drawing, and the art station in the kids' center quickly became his favorite spot. Jack often found himself sitting nearby, watching his son sketch animals, superheroes, or the ship itself, his focus intense and his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Hey, Max, that's looking great," Jack would say, offering a supportive smile as he took a seat beside him. Max glanced up briefly, his face lighting up with pride. "I want to be an artist someday, Dad," Max said earnestly, pointing to the sketch he had just finished of a dolphin jumping out of the water. "This is my dream." Jack's heart swelled with love for his son. "You can do anything you set your mind to, buddy," he replied, ruffling his hair. "You've got the talent." Meanwhile, Lily, ever the social butterfly, had made a new friend, Sophie, a 7-year-old girl who was also staying on the cruise. They spent hours together exploring the ship's activities, and one day, they decided to create their own impromptu picnic on one of the ship's balconies. Lily proudly laid out her snacks, and Sophie giggled as they talked about their favorite movies and books. Jack watched them from a distance, his heart warmed by the sight of his daughter's carefree joy. Despite the tension in his own life, seeing his children so happy gave him a sense of peace. He felt grateful for these moments, knowing that his role as a father was one thing that remained constant, even when everything else felt uncertain. One afternoon, Jack took Max and Lily to one of the ship's pools. Max, who had always been a little hesitant around water, was now showing a keen interest in swimming. Lily, on the other hand, was fearless. She had already mastered the basics and loved to dive underwater to retrieve pool toys. Jack watched proudly as Max took his first strokes in the shallow end, while Lily did playful laps around him, teasing him to catch up. "Dad, look!" Max called out, his voice filled with excitement as he swam toward the deep end. "I'm getting better." Jack nodded, applauding his son's progress. "You're doing awesome, Max. I'm proud of you." It was moments like this, small, simple, and genuine, that reminded Jack of why he was here. His children were growing up before his eyes, and while their family's dynamic was beginning to unravel, the bond between him and his kids remained strong. That was something he could hold on to, no matter what else happened. While Jack was busy with the kids, he couldn't help but notice that Megan continued to spend more and more time away from their cabin. At first, he thought it was just part of her need for relaxation, a desire to unwind on her own. But as the days passed, it became harder to ignore the pattern. She would leave early in the morning, claiming she was going for a walk or to meet some friends, only to return hours later, sometimes a little disheveled, sometimes with a look on her face that Jack couldn't quite read. One evening, Jack decided to take Max and Lily to dinner on his own, hoping to distract himself from the unease building inside him. As they walked through the ship's grand dining hall, with its shimmering chandeliers and luxurious decor, Jack couldn't help but feel a pang of loneliness. Megan had been absent again, claiming she wanted a little time to herself, and Jack couldn't help but feel that her explanations were growing more and more rehearsed. During dinner, Max and Lily chattered excitedly about their day. Lily's picnic with Sophie, Max's drawings, and their plans to spend the next day trying out the ship's rock climbing wall. But Jack's thoughts kept drifting back to Megan. Her behavior was becoming harder to ignore, and part of him wondered whether he had missed signs earlier in their marriage, signs that things weren't as they seemed. When dinner was over and the kids had gone to bed, Jack sat on the balcony, staring out at the endless sea. The stars above were bright, but the vastness of the ocean only seemed to amplify the emptiness he felt inside. He loved his family more than anything, but as the days went on, it became clearer that something was wrong, and he didn't know if he could fix it. He stood up, his gaze drifting to their cabin door. Megan would be back soon, he thought, but part of him wasn't sure what kind of reception he would get when she did return. The woman he thought he knew seemed to be slipping away, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could pretend that everything was okay. The cruise was supposed to be an escape, but for Jack, it was turning into something else entirely. The next few days felt like a blur to Jack. Every morning, Megan would leave early, claiming she needed some time to herself. Sometimes, she told him she was meeting some people from the ship's spa or taking a walk along the deck. But the more she disappeared, the more Jack began to notice the subtle signs that something wasn't right. He'd seen her in passing with Tom, the young bartender, more than once. They'd exchanged flirtatious smiles, and sometimes she'd laugh a little too loud at his jokes. There were other men too, crew members, passengers, people Jack didn't recognize. Megan was always charming, always the life of the party, but it seemed like she was spending more and more of her time with others, and less with him. One night, after dinner, Jack asked Megan if she wanted to take a walk around the deck to enjoy the sea breeze. She glanced at him absently, then turned to the group of women she had been chatting with. "Maybe later, Jack," she said, waving him off. "I'm going to grab another drink with the girls. You go ahead." Her words stung more than he wanted to admit, but Jack tried not to show it. He nodded and turned to leave. As he walked alone around the deck, the ocean breeze cool against his skin, Jack's mind raced. He couldn't help but wonder if this was just the stress of the trip. Maybe Megan was just trying to unwind. But as the days passed, it became increasingly clear that her behavior wasn't just a phase. Something deeper was going on. Jack had always trusted Megan. She was the love of his life, the woman he had built a family with. But the more he thought about it, the more questions started to swirl. The way she acted with the men, the way she was always too busy when he needed her, it was all starting to feel like a pattern. One afternoon, Jack decided to check the security footage of the ship's common areas, just to see if his suspicions were unfounded. It wasn't something he would normally do, but the feeling of unease had been growing too strong to ignore. He accessed the footage from the past few days, watching as Megan moved through the ship, her behavior shifting from casual to clearly flirtatious. In one video, she was laughing with Tom at the bar, their faces close, her hand lightly brushing his arm. In another, she was talking to a couple of men at the casino, her body language relaxed and inviting. Then, Jack found something that made his blood run cold. A video of Megan leaving Tom's cabin late at night, her hair slightly tousled, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. Jack watched as she disappeared down the hallway, not noticing the camera. His stomach dropped. He replayed the footage, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. This wasn't just harmless flirting. His wife, the woman he trusted above all others, was having an affair. A wave of disbelief and anger surged through him. He felt sick. He had been so preoccupied with his own business dealings, with the kids, with everything else on this trip, that he had failed to see the signs. But now it was undeniable. Megan was cheating on him. And what was worse, he wasn't sure if he could forgive her. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Jack felt his heart break as the thoughts swirled in his head. But it didn't stop there. As he sifted through more footage, one thing became painfully clear. Megan wasn't just spending time with Tom. She was with other men too. She was having multiple affairs. But there was one more detail that struck Jack the hardest. It wasn't just the fact that she was cheating. No, it was something else. Something that made his hands tremble as he looked at the footage. Megan, despite everything, had seemed happy. Her laughter, her flirtations, they were real. The realization stung more than he could have imagined. This wasn't just a momentary lapse. Megan had been seeking something Jack hadn't been able to give her. But what hurt the most, what twisted in his chest, was the thought that she might be pregnant. One of these men could be the father. His breath caught in his throat. Jack sat back in his chair, staring at the screen in stunned silence. He had hoped, against all odds, that he had misunderstood, that it was just some innocent flirtation. But this was more. He could no longer deny it. His mind raced as he thought of his children, Max and Lily. How could he protect them from this? How could he fix this? Jack sat there, frozen in place, the weight of the truth sinking in. He had never been the kind of man to avoid confrontation, but now, with the security footage before him, with his heart shattered into pieces, Jack didn't know what to do next. The thought of confronting Megan terrified him. What could he even say? How could he look at her after everything he had just discovered? But there was something else, something deeper gnawing at him. He knew he couldn't ignore it any longer. The facade of their perfect marriage was just that, a facade. And now, as the ship sailed further away from the land, Jack found himself faced with an uncomfortable reality. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The days that followed were filled with a gnawing tension that Jack couldn't escape. Every time Megan disappeared, he felt his frustration grow. Every time she returned with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, He felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Megan was having an affair, and the weight of the knowledge seemed to press down on him more with each passing hour. Then came the day when Jack ran into David. It was at one of the ship's bars, a spacious lounge with large windows overlooking the endless ocean. Jack had gone there to grab a drink after dinner, needing to clear his mind. He was lost in thought, staring out at the stars, when he heard someone call his name. Jack! The voice was familiar, too familiar. Jack turned, his pulse quickening as he locked eyes with David, one of the men Megan had been spending so much time with. David was tall, with short, dark hair and a casual yet confident air about him. He was the kind of man who looked comfortable in any setting, whether in a tuxedo or a t-shirt. The kind of man who could charm anyone, including his wife. David, Jack replied, forcing a smile. I didn't expect to see you here. David grinned, moving toward him with an ease that made Jack's stomach churn. I could say the same about you. Megan's been telling me all about how you've been busy with business stuff. But you should really take a break, man. This cruise is meant to be fun, right? Jack nodded curtly, his mind racing. Megan had been with David a lot, more than any of the other men. He wasn't sure what made him snap, but in that moment, something inside him broke. Listen, David, Jack began, his voice low but sharp. We need to talk. David raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. About what? This isn't exactly the right place for a serious chat. No, Jack said, his voice getting firmer. It's the perfect place. Because I'm done pretending. I know what's been going on. I know about you and Megan. David's expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly recovered. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. Jack, look, I'm sorry if you're upset, but this is not what you think. Megan and I don't need to hear your excuses. Jack cut him off, his fists clenching at his sides. You think this is just some fling, right? Well, let me tell you something. You're not the only one involved. She's been with Tom, too. And probably more people. You've all been lying to me. David's face hardened. Look, I didn't want to hurt you, man. But Megan, she's been chasing something. I don't know what it is, but she hasn't been happy with you for a while. Jack felt a flare of anger rise in his chest. Don't pretend you know anything about my marriage, David. You don't know a damn thing about what Megan and I have built. You've just taken advantage of her when she was vulnerable. The words stung, and Jack could see that David was starting to get defensive. But before Jack could say anything more, David's face twisted in anger. You think this is all her fault? David sneered. You're not exactly Mr. Perfect either. She wanted someone who could make her feel alive, Jack. Not some businessman who's more interested in his deals than his family. Jack was taken aback. The words hit harder than he'd expected. He had known their marriage was strained, but hearing David speak so candidly about it stung in a way he hadn't anticipated. But just as quickly as the anger flared, Jack's composure returned. He knew this wasn't the time for a confrontation. Stay away from my wife, Jack said, his voice cold. And stay away from me. David stared at him for a moment, his jaw tight, before muttering something under his breath. This isn't over, Jack. Jack watched as David walked away, a strange mix of relief and dread settling in his chest. He had confronted David, but he hadn't expected it to feel so empty. The anger he'd felt moments ago quickly morphed into something else, an aching void. It wasn't just David he was angry at. It was himself. As he stood there in the bar, the weight of his situation hit him harder than before. This wasn't just a betrayal by Megan. This was a failure on his part, too. He had allowed his business, his career, to take precedence over his family. He had neglected the one thing that truly mattered, his wife and his children. But the conflict with David wasn't over. Jack didn't know it yet, but what had started as a verbal altercation was about to take a darker turn. That evening, as Jack stood on the deck of the ship, staring out into the night, he thought about the path ahead. His marriage was in ruins. His family was fractured, and the weight of everything he had discovered, the affair, the lies, the betrayal, was almost too much to bear. But what Jack didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The confrontation with David had set a chain of events in motion, and before long, Jack would find himself in a situation far more dangerous than he ever could have imagined. The sea, once a symbol of escape, now felt like a prison, and Jack was trapped in a storm of his own making. The argument with David left Jack shaken, but it was nothing compared to the emotional toll he was about to face. The weight of everything, Megan's affair, the tension, the lies, had driven him to the brink. One evening, feeling utterly drained, he wandered to the ship's quiet lounge, hoping for some peace. Amelia, the nanny, was there. She had always been kind, attentive to the kids, and a good listener. Jack had never thought of her in any other way, but tonight he needed someone to talk to. "Jack, you look exhausted," Amelia said, noticing his weary expression. "Do you want to sit down? You seem like you need a break." He nodded, sinking into the chair beside her. The sound of the ship's gentle rocking calmed him, but the emotional storm inside him raged on. They sat in silence for a while, until Jack finally spoke. "I don't know what to do, Amelia. I thought this trip would help us reconnect, but instead, it's just unraveling everything. Megan, she's been with other men. I can't believe it." Amelia listened carefully, her eyes full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Jack. That's so painful." The honesty in her voice was comforting, and Jack felt a strange relief in being able to speak freely. For the first time in days, he felt someone genuinely cared. I don't know how I got here. I've been so focused on work that I missed all the signs. And now, I can't fix it. I don't know if I want to," Jack admitted. Amelia reached out, placing a hand on his. "You can't fix everything, Jack. Sometimes people change, and sometimes we need to let go in order to heal." Jack looked at her, her gentle expression making him feel vulnerable in a way he hadn't been in years. Without thinking, he leaned closer, his emotions too raw to contain. One thing led to another, and before he knew it, they were sharing a kiss, a moment of escape from the chaos that had taken over his life. The kiss was short but intense, filled with a mix of comfort, guilt, and confusion. Amelia pulled back, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry," Jack muttered, standing abruptly. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay, Jack," Amelia interrupted softly. "You needed someone to be there." But Jack's mind was reeling. He hadn't expected this. He wasn't sure if this was just a moment of weakness, or if it was something more. One thing was clear, though. He wasn't the same man who boarded the ship. His marriage was crumbling, his emotions tangled, and now he had crossed a line with Amelia. As the night wore on, Jack found himself more lost than ever. But there was one thing he knew for sure. Everything had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days blurred into each other as the cruise neared its end. Jack's mind was made up, though he didn't speak of it yet. He had finally accepted the undeniable truth. His marriage to Megan was over. Every conversation, every moment of tension, and every betrayal had pointed to the same conclusion. He couldn't go back. He couldn't fix it. Megan had torn their relationship apart, and though he once believed in forgiveness, Jack realized that the wounds were too deep to heal. He avoided Megan as much as possible during the last days of the cruise, choosing to focus on the kids and the growing connection with Amelia. Amelia had become his confidant, his emotional anchor in the chaos. She listened without judgment and always seemed to know what to say. He could feel a shift inside himself, a shift towards something new. He wasn't sure what it was, but for the first time in a long while, Jack felt like he had a future. Megan, on the other hand, seemed to sense the change. Her usual flippant attitude toward their marriage had turned into defensiveness. She'd catch him with his gaze fixed somewhere far away and ask if something was wrong. He would just nod, telling her everything was fine. But in truth, everything was falling apart. One afternoon, as they stood on the deck, the Caribbean sun setting behind them in fiery hues of orange and pink, Jack knew it was time. He couldn't keep pretending. The facade of their marriage had crumbled, and so had the man he used to be. "Megan, we need to talk," he said, his voice steady but cold. She looked at him with a faint, almost bored expression. "Jack, we're on vacation. Can't this wait?" "No, it can't," he said. "This has gone on long enough." Megan raised an eyebrow, clearly irritated. "You're not going to make this into a scene, are you? I'm sure whatever you think is happening, it's not." "I know about the affairs, Megan," Jack said bluntly. "I know about Tom, and David, and whoever else you've been with. I saw the footage." Megan's face flushed with a mix of surprise and guilt. She opened her mouth to speak, but Jack held up his hand. I don't need any more excuses, Megan. I don't need you to tell me why. I don't need you to justify your actions. I'm done. Her expression shifted from defensive to desperate. Jack, please. It wasn't like you think. No, Jack interrupted, his voice firm. I've seen enough. You've made your choices, and I've made mine. I can't live like this anymore. Megan's eyes welled with tears, but Jack's resolve remained unshaken. This wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was about him taking back control of his life. He wasn't going to stay in a marriage that was suffocating him. You don't get it, Jack. You're just going to give up on us? She pleaded, her voice cracking. I'm not giving up, he said, his voice softening for just a moment. I'm letting go. With that, Jack turned and walked away, leaving Megan standing on the deck, her cries fading behind him. The decision was made. The marriage was over. And as the ship continued its journey back to port, Jack felt a strange sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't that he was happy. He was still hurt, still confused, still angry. But he knew that he was finally doing what was right for him, for his future, and for his children. During the final days of the cruise, Jack spent as much time as possible with Max and Lily. They went to the kids' center, they swam in the pools, and they even played table tennis with Alex, the teenager Max had befriended. Jack realized that this was what he needed, to focus on his kids, to create memories with them, to protect them from the chaos of their mother's choices. The bond between Jack and Amelia continued to grow. Though they hadn't spoken about the night they shared, there was an unspoken understanding between them. Amelia had become more than just a nanny. She had become his confidant, his support, and his solace. By the time the ship docked, Jack had made another decision. He was going to file for divorce. Megan's actions had irreparably broken their marriage, and he couldn't ignore it any longer. He was ready to move forward, to find a new life for himself and his children. And as the ship finally anchored in the harbor, Jack felt a sense of freedom he hadn't felt in years. The divorce was finalized swiftly. There were no drawn-out battles, no dramatic courtroom scenes. Jack didn't want that. He wanted to move on. He wanted peace for himself and for his children. Megan, despite her initial attempts to reconcile, eventually accepted the reality. Jack had made it clear that their marriage was no longer salvageable. The betrayal had been too much, the wounds too deep. She was left alone, nursing the consequences of her actions. She returned to one of her lovers for a while, but it didn't last. Jack heard through mutual friends that she had struggled with loneliness. The man she'd chosen, the one she thought would bring her happiness, quickly moved on. Megan's romantic choices seemed as fleeting as her commitment to their marriage. But Jack wasn't concerned with Megan's struggles. His focus was entirely on Max and Lily. He moved them into a new home, away from the shadows of their past. It wasn't a grand house, but it was theirs, peaceful and safe, a place where they could rebuild and find joy again. Jack made sure to spend as much time with them as possible. Weekends were spent at the park or with friends from the ship like Alex and Sophie. Max continued to develop his love for drawing, filling pages of sketchbooks with images of the ocean and the ship, while Lily blossomed into a confident swimmer, splashing around in the pool with her new friends. Jack found a new rhythm in life, one that didn't revolve around late-night conference calls and corporate meetings. His business partnership with Harry Lanza grew stronger as they began working on their first joint project, a new luxury development. The project was a major success, one that would define Jack's career moving forward. But despite the success, it wasn't his work that filled him with a sense of pride. It was the quiet moments with his kids, their laughter at the dinner table, their endless questions about the world, the simple joys of life. As for Amelia, their relationship evolved. She had become a steady presence in their lives, not just as a nanny, but as someone who truly cared for Jack and his family. Their bond deepened, and as the months passed, Jack realized that she was the person he had been waiting for all along. She had been there when he had needed someone most, offering comfort without expectation. One evening, after the kids were tucked in bed, Jack and Amelia sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sun set over the horizon. Jack had spent years feeling like he was adrift, searching for something that would give his life meaning. But now, in this quiet moment, he knew he had found it. You know, Jack said, his voice soft, I never thought I'd be here. I thought my life was supposed to go a certain way. But sometimes, the universe has a different plan for us. Amelia smiled, her hand resting gently on his. Maybe it does. But sometimes that different plan is exactly what we need. Jack squeezed her hand, a sense of peace settling over him. He had lost so much, but in the process, he had found something better, something real. He looked over at the house, at the kids, and at Amelia, and he knew that no matter what the future held, he was ready for it. Life had given him a second chance, and this time, he wasn't going to waste it.